Deborah Masterson is my guest on this episode of the Everything's a Primary Source podcast, with me to discuss the 1970s band Freedom Quest, of which she was a member, and her new book, Freedom Quest, A Love Story, and what they can both tell us about time and place. This is altogether appropriate as 1 month from the publication of this podcast, I'll be wrapping up a Freedom Quest of my own. I'll be taking the Everything's a Primary Source podcast from Chicago to Colorado Springs, learning about our country's long history of independence, freedom, and self-expression from the folks I meet along the way. Until then, I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Take a little time to get yourself together. Take a little time to let yourself feel right. Life is just a concert. The stage is all around you. You're just a part of a big old band that's playing day and night.
Like reading the liner notes of a record, that was... how often were we actually listening to the music and having reading material at the same time? I mean, it was, and that's, you do connect the dots too. Like as you're reading it, learned out, who played bass on this? Oh, who else did they play? Or like, who were they thinking? Like, what was I learned so much about other artists to discover by reading those liner notes.
Right. I find it sad now that you can't. It's hard to find the players on certain music now. You really have to dig sometimes to find out who played bass on a certain song, or who even wrote the song. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard to find. So we listen to all this music and there's no credits.
So
You have
much of
to
the
dig.
record industry has gone in on solo artists, and for obvious reasons in some cases, that if you look at the top selling artists of the last, even as far back as starting in the 90s, but definitely the last 10 years, most of them are solo musicians.
Mm.
Even if they have a backing band, you wouldn't know, like you just said, who those people are, because a lot of them are interchangeable session musicians that get elevated to touring with the artist and recording with them, but it's a rotating ensemble.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't end up, and I from the risk side of things, if you're dealing with a band
Hmm.
and every member of the band sees themselves as an equal part of that band, you're more likely to run into people having artistic differences or creative, not wanting to do certain things. Where if it's just one artist,
That's right.
it's just them.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And there's more money there too, for an artist who writes his or her own music, writes their own songs, there's a lot more royalties there for them too.
So in a way, when you appeared recently in San Diego at that record store,
Yeah.
and let's give them a quick plug. What was the name of the record store in San Diego again?
Folk Arts Rare Records, and it's been there
That's
since 1965.
Oh man, that is
Yeah,
they are themselves a product of such an incredible time in music.
exactly.
And you were there with your book, and it's like, here is, if you want liner notes, I got liner notes, right?
So
That's what
true.
your
Yeah.
book is all about. So Freedom Quest
Mhm.
is not only the name of the book, but also the name of the group, right? Your
Yeah.
band
Yeah.
from around that era.
1973. Yeah.
Wow.
And even more amazing was the record store is in the same neighborhood where the band originated and where they used to rehearse at our house. I mean, literally
So
like a couple of miles away
So
in
talk
North.
about full circle. So I mean, you were going to that record store. Is that where you're getting your inspiration, perhaps?
Well, when I found out that they were interested, I was like, this is the place. It just was so amazing to be back in the neighborhood, with some of the band members, that still are in San Diego. And it was just, yeah, full circle completely. It was amazing.
I so I'm here with Deborah Masterson, and we're talking about the band Freedom Quest, of which you were a member,
Correct.
and your latest book, which is Freedom Quest.
Freedom Quest, a love story.
I'm intrigued by the name of the group. I mean, it's something that It's consistent with the time period. We're looking at as the evolution of
Yeah.
rock and roll, groups are taking on much more, um, much different names than before. It's not the Crickets. It's not, I mean,
Hmm.
even the Grateful Dead were the Warlocks, which pretty cool name, but
Oh,
not
wow, I
really
didn't realize
consistent with
that.
what they, or I know at least Jerry Garcia had a group called the Warlocks, and
Okay.
John Fogerty had a group before Creedence Clearwater Revival that had a much more rock and rolly sound to it.
Okay.
The somethings.
Yeah.
Freedom Quest, I mean that implies that it's like much more than just a band making music. So um the way things work on the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, we treat, it's in the name, everything as documents of time and place. And the way that we do that is we go through, I have a series of questions. We're not going to go through all of them today because a lot of them are actually answered in our conversation. Like you just answered the geographic component of it. San Diego, Southern California is where it was made,
Hmm.
and there's something to that. But through these questions that you would apply to, say, an artifact in a museum, we're applying to things, in this case, like a rock and roll group, a musical act from the early 1970s. And so these questions and their answers, and who better to answer them than somebody who is very directly involved and
Right.
has
I
quite
was
literally wrote,
there.
yeah, you were there, you were part of it. They will enlighten us about not only, of course, your experiences, but kind of the world that was going on around you. It's a reflection of the times. I mean, we hear that all the time with media, that it's a reflection of its time.
Yeah.
And so,
Definitely.
my
Yeah.
first question for you is why did they make it?
Why,
Why
why
was
Freedom
freedom?
Quest?
Yeah, why was it there?
Why the title? Why did they choose Freedom Quest
Yeah, and even
as the
why did
title?
the band form? I mean, what was
Yeah.
the inspiration for forming the group and then giving it such a name like that?
Right. Well, it all stems from the protagonist of the book. He's called Michael in the book, an incredible musician. From the time he was born, he had music oozing out of his body. He was just 100% musician. He could play multiple instruments, and he got his first reel-to-reel tape deck and started recording his own songs at the age of 14. And that was in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And he ended up working a gig. It was a well-paid gig at a supper club in San Diego, so he moved down there. And yeah, he kept forming bands his whole life. And in 1973, he decided to form this band, and he called it Freedom Quest. Now, the reason for the title, too, also stems from Michael, or his real name in real life is Craig Ingraham. He was a seeker. He was a real, looking for, what is life all about and what is freedom. And for example, at the age of 14, right out of middle school, he decided to go into the seminary. He wanted to become a Catholic priest. And that was short-lived, but he was the type of person that was very philosophical, very spiritual, and really, looking for the answers to life. What was life about? So I think that's where the Freedom Quest title came from. And interestingly, for the book, that was a title that came very late. I went through probably 6 or 7 different titles before I finally landed on this, and it was it was truly staring me in the face. But it took one of my friends, another writer friend of mine, reading my manuscript to bring it to my attention. And I was like, oh my God, of course, I was kind of looking for a song lyric because he wrote maybe 150 songs, wrote and recorded. I mean, there is so much material. And so I was kind of looking at a song lyric or a song title, and I never even thought about the band name. And when she said, well, you know what your title of the book is, Freedom Quest, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. And it had just been staring me in the face. I didn't see it. It was amazing. So,
It almost breathes new life into the band itself that you're
yes, it certainly has. Yeah.
you're able to, bring it back up again and maybe continue the quest in a
Yeah.
way. I love this idea that had Craig slash Michael been born in another era, it's like
Mm.
100 years before, maybe not even that far back, that being a philosopher, being somebody who had all these questions, it would come out a different way. It would find another path. But because it's late 60s, early 1970s, rock and roll is the organ, no pun intended. Organs are usually involved in that, but that's the organ, that's the mechanism, that's
Well,
the
actually, there
way
was
it's
a Hammond
expressed.
B3 organ
There
in
it
there.
is. So, I mean,
And
there's
he was running it through Leslie speakers. That was a really big thing back then. Yeah, yeah,
so it implies and it very much communicates. I think that it's a very American thing, but especially at that junction in American history. I mean, let's talk about what was going on in the
yes.
country, outside the country. We're 10 years out from the Kennedy assassination. That was a generational marker. That was, where were you? How did this affect you? It definitely affected society and culture dramatically. So we're 10 years out of that. And the 60s, which started with so much promise, came to a considerably much darker end than anybody could have imagined. So were the 70s seen as almost like an extension of that 60s, or was it a chance for a new awakening? Was that what the 70s were
Well,
feeling
I think,
like?
this was early 70s, 1973. So there was still a very naive, very utopic kind of feeling. And yeah, let's talk about what was happening. Freedom, for example, I asked myself because I knew I was going to get this question, what is freedom? And I think, yes, you have to look at it in the context of what was happening at the time. Now, for example, the first birth control pill came out in 1967, 68. So women, for the first time, had a freedom they had never had before. The idea that they could have sex and not get pregnant, the chances of getting pregnant were maybe, 98% chance you would not get pregnant, right? So that was happening, and that contributed to this idea of free love and this whole hippie era, right? Short-lived because then AIDS came in about 15 years later, so
Yeah.
everything clamped down again. So you had that. You had the freedom, the psychedelic movement came in. Okay, so the psychedelics were discovered in 1950s, early 1950s, but right around the mid 60s, they suddenly came kind of mainstream. They broke out of the doctor's offices and the research laboratories, where they were making, by the way, very good success in treatments for alcoholism and PTSD and depression and all of that. Extremely good benefits they were finding. But when it broke out into kind of mainstream, everybody started taking psychedelics. I mean, psychedelics do a major job to your brain. And some of the things that they're discovering now, because they know scientifically what it does, is that it opens up your mind to this idea that everything is made out of the same thing. And everything, including people, cell phones, tables, everything, right? So this was this mind-blowing effect that happened to young people who were experimenting, and this hierarchical society, authoritarian society, got scared. They got
Mm.
very scared, the government and parents, because suddenly these young people were going free, freedom,
Mm.
I'm free, I can do, love and peace and all of this, right? But like you said, it was, like any movement, there's a term in the television business that movements jump the shark. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever heard that
Oh,
term,
yes, yes. It's
terminology, right?
from
From
Happy Days,
Fonzie,
right?
Happy Days, right? So like any movement, it comes to a kind of a peak and then it starts to decay, or it changes, right? And sure enough, this peace and love movement went to the dark side, and I think everybody talks about that pivotal moment of the rock and roll, the Rolling Stones concert
Yeah, Altamont.
as
Yeah.
yeah, Altamont as the kind of the moment where everybody got scared, and it was a dark, very dark moment.
There's a documentary that I like to show. It's a series actually that I show in my pop culture classes at school. It's from 1999. It's called The Century America's Time, and it was made by ABC News and the History Channel and hosted by Peter Jennings. And so he does a great job narrating, and they go through mostly decade by decade, but for some decades they break it up into different parts because there's so many different topics and themes. But they go through it and they have these titles that for each episode that really um tell you what you're getting into, and then it's almost like a video essay. They use all these different anecdotes and stories from that decade to paint the picture for it. And the one for that era, the early 1970s, they call it Approaching the Apocalypse.
Ah,
And they show and tell, but mostly show through their clips things like the Kent State shooting, which we just went past the memorial for that, and then Jackson State shortly thereafter. And then they talk about uh I mean, just almost every single piece that they're showing is the same elements. You have mostly young people in the streets, followed by police or military in their riot gear, clashing with them. There's demonstrations over here. There's the hard hat uprising over here in Lower Manhattan. It's just one story after another. And then you have the Attica prison riot, and it seems like in the early 1970s, yeah, we had just and I'm paraphrasing the film still, but they show at the very beginning when man landed on the moon in 1969, they
mm,
laid a plaque saying, "We came in peace for all mankind." Back on Earth, it wasn't so much of that. So that's how the 70s started, right? And you have
and
these
then on top of that,
questions.
let's not forget the Vietnam War.
Right. I mean, that's the overall thing that's
Yeah.
affecting everybody and their
So
attitudes.
1967 is when Michael's best friend Bill Perkins dies in Vietnam, and um, at that point, I heard I've heard veterans say that they were told that 50% of the soldiers were not coming back.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Now, I
Yeah.
don't think that's true, but veterans, and in fact, there was a documentary we made that when we got back together again about Bill Perkins, and there's a quote from one of the veterans in there that he says, "Yeah, that we were told 50% of us weren't coming back." And there was the draft,
Right.
so everybody was scared. My brothers, my friends, all my friends. So
I mean,
yeah,
so much of this was accelerated by mass media. It was unlike previous conflicts because you can do a pretty solid comparison between the Vietnam War and the conflict in Korea the decade prior. But
yeah.
what lacked from Korea was satellite television. You didn't have a live feed. You didn't have reporters embedded with the troops. You didn't have the college campuses. First of all, they weren't even as attended because the generation in college in the 1950s was
Yeah.
not the baby boomer generation. There
Right.
wasn't a huge population of college age kids. Those kids who were born in the late 40s into the early 50s, they were starting to go to college in the 60s.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
those campuses were full of students. They were very aware people. They understood what was happening around them, and they were being very knowledgeable of the media, right? So they were in tune to all of this. And not all, because I always have to point out, and this is something that comes up when you study media, is that the camera can tell you a story that it wants you to tell. It wants you
Right.
to understand that you can, if you're looking at, let's say a anti-war protest, if you frame it just right, you could communicate that there are hundreds of people in attendance.
Yes.
If you're actually there, maybe you could see that if the camera turns slightly to the left, there's nobody, and it's like right to the right, there's some guy walking his dog, and you're like, oh, okay, well, it actually wasn't that big.
Right.
So this is the era of TV communications. It's changing the way we understand the world around us. People are reacting to the same themes that had been there. Let's contain communism. Let's, keep Southeast Asia from, falling to further communist regimes. That was there in the 50s, but in the 60s, it takes a whole new social impact here in America. It's really on people's minds, especially young people, like you said. If you are of the age that you could be drafted or know somebody that could be drafted, that's gonna affect you and ask those big questions like,
And,
is
and,
this freedom?
and on a personal level, it was happening in families too. Parents were terribly afraid, fearful for what was happening with the young people, as they became freer. So, you had a lot of parents that were, you know, there were family issues between parents and children at that time too.
It was two very distinct generations that, the
Yes.
parents of
The,
they had fought their war.
the World War II parents,
Right.
the 1950s and the baby boomer era. Yeah, completely different. Yeah. Yeah.
And so with the band with Freedom Quest, I mean, how many members of the band are we talking about here? It was a large.
It was a
It,
large band. It was
it wasn't a
nine.
quartet, right?
No, yeah, it was nine members. So we had flute, violin, and then the rhythm section, bass, drum, guitar. Then we had percussion and three background vocals. So
Would
it
you
was
say it still
a great band.
constituted rock and roll, or was it? I mean, the new tet sound, right? So you have
I think
nine
it
people.
was, yeah, I think it's closest to psychedelic rock.
Okay,
Yeah, I think you would,
and
kind of label it psychedelic. Although, when I was at Folk Arts Rare Records, the manager, or the owner, sorry, yeah, it was the owner, Brendan, because we were playing the songs over the
yeah.
PA, and he's like, "Well, I would put this in the Laurel Canyon section." I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, that's interesting, because it really wasn't folk. But
Right.
I guess because there was a message to the music and it was very melodic, it kind of, I could see how he was seeing it in that category. But you had these. Each song is like 6 to 8 minutes long, so you had these huge jams in the middle, which was
Right.
so common during that period. Some of it sounds even jazzy, very, very jazz oriented. And actually, the keyboard player is a well-known recording artist, David Benoit, who has had a great career as a jazz pianist. And he actually does a show on K-Jazz in Los Angeles. And that was one of his first jobs. He was only 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It,
So,
I think we need to go back to the geographic component to this because you mentioned Laurel Canyon
yeah.
music. I mean,
Yeah.
to people in Southern California, I mean, these are. I went to Los Angeles a couple years ago. I went to Southern California a couple years ago for the first time in my life, and I fell in love with it. I think it was just. I mean, when I was there, I'm like, oh, this is why people want to live here. The weather was beautiful. I mean, it was just like every single day was perfect
Mhm.
and the surroundings. But what I was most just I was true Northeastern Yankee, totally out of my place, only knowing most of these locations from media once again, movies and
Mhm.
TV shows and references to this and that, different, the valley. And when I finally saw the signs for things and putting it into order, I'm like, oh, that's where I am. Okay, Ventura Highway that America sings about. I'm on it right now.
Right.
And
Reseda Boulevard, Tom
right.
Petty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, think about how many songs, just music alone, references, Mulholland and then you go up and down the coast. So I mean, the geography, and all the themes of geography has to have influenced. I mean, you're not going to get as many bands in that era anyway that are making music as you're describing as having such it seems like a very specific
Mhm.
California type thing. Well, why do you think California was such, I mean, is it just because it's quite literally the end of the
I think
road?
I think that has a lot to do with it. I think, the people that came to California, if you think back, like my great grandfather, left Pennsylvania, Amish country. He was a preacher, and he traveled across the United States and opened the first Amish church in Long Beach, California. These type of people were they were exploration, explored. They were explorers. Uh, they were risking a
Yeah.
lot to do that. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And then on top of that, you've got the weather. The perfect paradise weather all day, every day. You've got the ocean, you've got the mountains with snow. It truly was a paradisiacal type of place,
So
And,
many of them
we
were on
didn't
there.
realize, by the way, we didn't realize growing up, we didn't realize that. I mean, you know what I mean? We were in it, but
Yeah.
we didn't know that we were living in this exotic place that
Right.
people all over the world were like, oh my gosh, Yeah, we
It
didn't.
is the promised land. And
Yeah.
what you're describing for a lot of those people that came there throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, they were on their own version of a freedom quest, weren't they? They were,
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Sure.
that's so much the story of the United States is from east to west. Um, and
You know, we
even,
had we had orange trees in our backyard. We had 80-year-old orange trees in our backyard in the San Fernando Valley. And I didn't realize this until recently. I was doing some research, and orange trees are a representation of paradise
oh,
in ancient culture.
yeah,
So, here they were in our backyard. I mean, I never thought differently, and it was no big deal. I mean, I would make orange juice. I'd pick the oranges off the tree, right? And, here's another example of this paradise, idea that
yeah.
we're living in.
Oh, yeah. It's integrated in Renaissance art showing,
Surfing. Yes, right.
yeah,
Surfing,
yeah,
surfing actually was created in Hawaii,
right.
but, it came to Southern California first, and, there was and the skateboarding. Skateboarding was invented in Southern California. So all of that, the Beach Boys
Oh,
with their
yes.
whole, yeah, it was really quite remarkable.
But, I mean, we're representing so well. And I was thinking about the Beach Boys earlier, as I do every day. But I love the Beach Boys, by the way. I think
All right.
they're one of the greatest. They're my second favorite group of all time.
Oh, wow.
Only edged out by the Ramones, and
Oh,
that just because
wow.
they share a lot of similarities, and in many ways you could argue that the Ramones were doing their own version of Beach Boys, just heavily influenced by New York City because that's where they're from.
Oh,
And
interesting. Yeah,
you can
I'd
hear
like
the Beach Boys in their music.
to compare that.
And
Yeah,
great
interesting.
full circle moment is a couple years ago, and I'd already known that they had covered the song, but I was in California when I was visiting there. We saw the Beach Boys at Paso Robles, or up in
Yep.
midway up the state
Right.
at a vineyard, and they said, is anybody here from the East Coast? And like, I was like the only people that, my family's the only people that raised their hand. They're like, okay, we're going to do a song by the Ramones. And they did a song called Rockaway Beach. And Rockaway Beach is one of their songs that sounds very Beach Boys-ish, but it's about
Oh,
a beach in Queens that is anything but
right,
Southern California style.
right,
But
right.
hearing the Beach Boys or what's left of the Beach Boys singing a song that by every means was inspired by them,
Yeah,
right?
interesting.
It was such a cool full circle moment. And
Right.
then seeing it in California on top of that. I mean,
Yeah, there you go.
I was like, that is the coolest thing. To celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast is taking to the road. This summer, I will travel from Chicago to Colorado Springs, recording place-based podcast episodes and collecting short oral histories from members of the public along the way. This is not a retrospective project. It is a living one, built on the idea that history is not only something we inherit, but something we actively create. Visit everything-history.com/America250 to see how you can get involved with this public history initiative. I love about the Beach Boys is that, I mean, they're like you, they're natives to Los Angeles. Like
Right.
they're ambassadors in a way. They're the ones who bring that culture of surfing and of the just I mean, Surfing USA, they list off
Yeah,
all the different places up and down
right. Yeah,
the coast.
Rincon and
Like
yeah.
I always thought when they said Manhattan in that they were talking about Manhattan, New York. I'm like, who
Oh,
surfs in Manhattan, But
Manhattan
they're
Beach.
talking about Manhattan Beach, and
Yeah,
those
yeah.
are the kinds of things that get you interested in learning about that area. But and
Well, and
let's not forget. Oh, go ahead.
well, yeah, Hollywood. Okay, so media, film, television, all was originating from Hollywood. So, you know, that was another reason why all of the places around that area were known to the world
Yeah.
because that's where everything was being filmed.
Right. So much
You
easier to
know?
just turn your camera on.
Right,
And that, my understanding is also that's why Hollywood was founded, is because not only, I mean, most of the year, sunny, beautiful weather out, you don't need
right.
to,
They could
but
film all year
also
round. Yeah,
it is quite literally the end of the road. And
yeah.
so you're very far away from Washington, D.C., where all the copyrights are held
Oh,
for
that's interesting.
equipment and for stories. So if you're going to be telling a story like Nosferatu, which is Dracula, and you don't want anybody showing up and shutting you down while you're filming your silent picture, and it's much easier than what Edison was doing in New Jersey. New Jersey's
Interesting.
not far from where
DC.
all the copyrights are held,
Right,
so
interesting.
and
Ah, I never
enforced.
thought of that. That's
So
interesting.
that was one. I mean, Southern California is just perfect for that. So by the time you get to the 1960s and into the 70s, it's just a world of this. It's the ultimate media. It's a geographic paradise, but it's also a media paradise. And if anybody's going to be there to interpret, the Beach Boys were in on it. They were changing a lot in the late 60s, early 70s. They were singing songs like, Student Protest Song was one of their songs, right? Student Protest Time.
Yeah.
They were getting in with the Maharaji. They were learning about Eastern philosophies and cultures. Is that was Craig slash Michael interested in those things as well? Was that
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Hinduism?
Yeah, there's actually on the back of the book, you might have noticed the picture of his little Buddha. He had a Buddha, and draped around the Buddha is a red thread that was given to him by the Dalai Lama. So back in the early 80s, he was living in Hawaii, and the Dalai Lama came to the University of Hawaii. And as he jokingly said, this was before the Dalai Lama became a rock star.
Yeah.
So, filling stadiums, there were only about 30 people in a classroom. And so the Dalai Lama gave each of them a red thread. And he said, this represents the red thread that runs through all of our hearts. We are all one. And so here, let me show you on the back of the book. Um, I still have the red thread
All right. Yeah.
And I took this picture and I asked the publisher if they could put it. And this is the Buddha that he had. So he had the red thread draped around the Buddha. So yes, he was, you know, grew up, as I said, Catholic, and always, savored the essence of the Catholic religion. But he also was broader than that in his spirituality. And but then, being a seeker and seeking outside of himself, he fell into a very dark period of time while he was in Hawaii. So I don't know if you have read the book yet, but he, ended up in a cult, in a religious
Yeah.
cult, for about 3 years over in Hawaii. And it was very difficult to write that period because he was the love of my life. And but it was an important pivotal moment in his life. I had to work really hard trying to understand. And of course, when I got back together, we were separated for about 26 years. And then when I got back together with him, that was one of the first things he said. I have to share with you some of this horrible stuff that happened. And I said I couldn't believe it. I was like, how in the world could you get involved in a cult? I don't get it. And interestingly, when the book manuscript was finished and I had some professional editors reading it, one of the notes I kept getting was, I don't believe that Michael would join a cult. I said, well, it's true. So here you go. Fiction is or the truth is stranger than fiction because it was true, but I had to make it believable to the reader. So what I had to do was really go back and ask myself, how did this happen? And luckily, the cult leader had him keep a journal. So I actually had journals from that period of time that I had to sift through, which was
Mm.
extremely hard
I
to
imagine.
your loved
Yeah.
one, trying to understand how this happened. And he was not only mentally abused, but physically abused. He
Oh my
almost
goodness.
lost his hand. He was in the hospital for a week, almost lost his hand. He would have never been able to play music again. So I realized after, a lot of research and a lot of study about cults that they all work the same way. First of all, they prey on vulnerable people, and at that point, Michael or Craig Ingram, in real life, had I had left him. The band had broken up. The record deal had disappeared, and he had given up. He had gained a lot of weight. He was hibernating in his bedroom, basically. Um, and a friend of his said, "Hey, let's move to Hawaii, a new start." And so he sold all of his recording equipment and he moved to Hawaii with a couple of friends with just a guitar and a backpack.
Mm.
And when he was over there, he met this very enigmatic man on the tennis courts who was an extremely good player. And he's like, man, I want to play like this guy. And, one thing led to another. And he started, this guy, I call him Emir in the book, learned all about him. And Craig was an open book and told him everything. He said, yeah, I lost the love of my life, the biggest regret. I was a Catholic. I went to the seminary. I'm adopted. I lost everything. And the cult leader used all of that against him.
Of
For
course.
example,
Yeah.
he was living in a gated estate at the foot of Diamond Head. So when Michael first goes over to his house, it's like, wow, this guy, must be for real. He's living in this beautiful and incredible gated estate. And he had a grand piano overlooking the bay, and he had guitars. And as he walked in the door, there were some pictures in the entry, the foyer. He said, "Oh, this is a picture of me with the Pope. Um, the Pope was giving me an award because I take care of orphans in Southeast Asia. Well, Craig was adopted, so that, hit
Mm.
him in his heart. All of it was an absolute lie, all of it. And, he's one thing led to another, and he said, well, I can help you become successful in your career, but you have to go through warrior training first. And in order to do that, I suggest you move in with me. Well, why not? Baby grand piano, you can use that to write your music every day, and we're gonna put together a national tour. You're going to be headlining it. And he dropped a lot of names of people that he said he knew, all of that. And through slowly mental, he would sleep deprivation and food deprivation, he slowly turned into a total crazy vegetable. I mean, the
Mm.
guy was just completely controlled by this guy, Emir. So, that's a crazy part of the book. Um, you know,
But I mean, it's a terrible thing. Like you said, truth is much
Stranger
wilder
Things.
than fiction, is so much stranger than fiction, but it is also something that I think seems consistent with the time period because you had so many people who, I mean, I guess that's the cost in a way of being a seeker, being an open-minded person,
Mhm.
seeking out truth, looking for any answers, is that you don't necessarily always put up the
The barrier.
guard, yeah, and the trying to keep yourself as cautiously safe as other people. You
Yeah.
go in the other direction, and you listed off all those characteristics about him and how he grew up and under what circumstances. Anybody that's predatory would and wants control for whatever reason would just take right advantage of that. And it seems like there was more than a few people in that era in the 70s and into the 80s. You don't hear much about cults in previous time periods,
Right.
and they seem to have kind of, I'm sure they still exist, but they seem to have kind of hit a peak of media attention in the 90s with the
Yep.
um various groups showing up on the news and the terrible things that they were talked into doing. And of course, in the 70s, you had in Jonestown,
Yeah.
the that, but it was like, is that tragic, terrible, yet still reflective of the era where you
I think,
have a lost society, or at least parts of society were just lost and
yeah, if
needed
you
some
think
kind
about
of,
it, there was a cultural revolution that happened, that we talked about in the 60s. And with that, it kind of blew up every kind of societal uh, rule, I mean, everything was being questioned. And
yeah.
like you said, with, the assassination of JFK and Martin Luther King and all of that, I think there's a very famous song by Glenn Henley, rock and roll song called "The End of Innocence," which basically talks about that. There was this 1950s very kind of innocent time period, and then everything kind of just blew up with the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. So everybody was searching. Uh, no rule was taken for granted anymore, and everybody was searching. Now, I can say that ultimately Michael realizes that the seeking the truth is not outside of yourself, but it's within. And if you dig deep into any philosophical, spiritual, or religious uh, culture, you'll realize that, seeking the truth, seeking spirituality or whatever is within you. You can't find it outside of you. You have to find it within. So ultimately, that's what he realizes at the end of his life.
Take me away, let my heart soar like an eagle. Find me a nest, let me fly home like a seagull. To my fantasy world where the band the ice cream cops who shoot water guns and play with the bad guys. And no one throws punches, they only throw cream pies. Now I must go, my path it lies before me. Going insane, so this old world will ignore me. My dreams were all lies, reality haunts me. It chews at my soul with teeth that I can't see. So take me away, let my heart soar like an eagle. Find me a nest, let me fly home like a seagull to my fantasy world where the bad guys fight with gumdrops and you bleed lemonade when your head's cracked by the ice cream cops who shoot water guns and play with the bad guys. No one throws punches, they only throw cream pies. Take me away.
Pivoting to the book, because I guess we do have two primary sources on hand right now. If we're following my line of reasoning that everything can be seen that way, we have the band Freedom Quest, and that's very much, as we have talked about, the reflection of its time period. Is what you just mentioned the reason why you wrote the book? Is Freedom Quest a love story that is a product of the 2020s? Is that part of your own internal, inward reflections? Is that something that you see yourself along with other people, peers, and just kind of now of this reexamination that's happening?
Well, several people have asked me that, like, what did you learn about yourself in writing this book? I think that I had to learn a lot of lessons before I could write it. So, uh, now this is new, right? That this book just came out April 21st. So maybe if you ask me 10 years later, what did I learn about writing the book? Maybe the answer will be different. But what I think happened was I had to really learn a lot of the lessons about myself. I had to really get to know myself, get to know Michael, Craig Ingram. I had to really spend a lot of time uh, getting to know myself before I could write this book. And it was in so doing that I was able to write the book, I think. Um, so, as we all have, we all have a lot of trauma that we need to work through. It could be from family issues, or war or whatever. And in working through that, it took me a long time, and I'm sure, there's still more to work through. They say it's like peeling back an onion,
Yeah.
right? There's always more. But I was surprised to realize that some of the trauma that I had to work through, I didn't even work through until my early 70s. Um, I'll be 76 this year, and very surprising that it has taken me that long, to understand some of the things that happened in my life. There's a quote in the book by Alama Prabha: "Things cannot be understood in the here and now."
I can't help but agree with that.
Right, So we can't really understand what happens until later as we look back and reflect on the past. Uh,
That's I think I might have to start using that more often because that is essentially the purpose of history. History is a
yes,
man-made thing, right? It's not
yeah,
natural. The past is what happens, but you don't really understand that until later. You can't do it. I get bothered sometimes when people say, "Oh, this is a historic moment." Like, well, you don't know that.
there you go.
The
Right
future will
on.
decide for us if this is a historic moment
Yeah,
or not.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
So that
was
really
was
got
this was this always a book? I mean, was it something that you
mm.
did you ever consider another media form of expressing these feelings and ideas in this examination? It was a book, it was going to be a book no matter what.
Yeah, no, I never thought about it as any other way. Craig always wanted to write his book, write his story, and actually there was another friend of his, high school friend of his, who was a professional writer who approached him about writing his story because he had such an unconventional life, very adventurous and
Mhm.
unconventional life. And his friend got busy on another project, so it never happened. But he started dictating stories to me before he passed away in 2020. And so, I had all of this material, and I had felt the same way. Actually, I looked so for a while I was married to my husband. Craig and I never got married, so that was just we had hoped to, but it never happened. We always said we were eternally engaged. Um, but my husband, the father of my two children, while we were married, I was a talent agent. So I actually had a talent agency representing crew, and I was, I was pitching projects. I was reading a lot of screenplays, spec screenplays, and I actually had a little bit of success in that area, promoting and producing some television projects. Um, and I actually pitched this long before he passed away to a studio exec. And I found the pitch that I had pitched him, this idea for this story about Craig Ingram.
Yeah.
But it didn't have an ending yet. The ending that I had was that he actually became a big rock and roll star when Grace and Michael get back together again. And the first prologue, the first scene in the book is actually that. So Michael and Grace are preparing. They're walking on to the huge stage. Like picture the Hollywood Bowl or something like that, and they're getting ready for this concert. And then their manager says, "Hey, your song just broke in the top 40." They're playing it like crazy. They hear their song on the radio for the first time, and Grace turns to Michael and says, "Michael, you did it. You're a rock star." Right? So that's how it opens. And that was actually the ending that I had for the book back in 96,
Mm.
1996. So that was like the first time I was thinking about this. But, it didn't happen that way. And ultimately, you know, now that the history has progressed, the real ending happened, and which I think is much more real and a better story, really. Is Michael does not become a rock star, and what really happened brings up a lot of interesting questions. Like what is real success? Everybody thought he was going to be a rock star, and a lot of musicians were very excited about playing with him because he had all his own songs. He was the songwriter. He was an incredible guitar player. He could play lead. He could play great rhythm guitar. He had a three-octave voice. It was amazing. I mean, the guy was absolutely amazing. So a lot of people were expecting him to be a rock star, but he never really wanted to be. So there were multiple times during his life that he got very close, and for some reason, either subliminally or whatever, it didn't happen. And so at the end of his life, Michael and Grace have a discussion, and she asks him, well, don't you feel sad? Don't you feel bad that, all of these songs that you've written and recorded, but nobody's really, not really heard them? I mean, a handful of people in the world have heard these songs. And he's like, no. He goes, I wrote them. I recorded them. They're there. If anybody wants to listen to them, they're there. So he was that type of 100% artist that couldn't
Mm.
pitch himself. He couldn't promote himself. He just did his art.
He's just
And
making it. He's just doing
yeah,
it as his expression. And I suppose we've been saying all along, any other time period, he would have been doing whatever version of that existed
one
in
of his
those days.
favorite, yeah, one of his favorite shows on television was Robin Hood. And I remember him telling me he actually dictated a story to me, which never ended up in the book, about how he loved Robin Hood because he would be wandering through the opening of the TV series. So we're talking late 50s, I think, early 60s. Uh, he was wandering through the forest with a guitar like a troubadour
Yeah.
singing, and he's like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. See? So, in any other time, he would have been a troubadour traveling from town to town.
Well, I'll tell you what's very appropriate is that Disney's Robin Hood, which is my all-time favorite Disney movie, guess what year that came out? 1973.
Wow.
And that's
Oh my
exactly
gosh.
how that story
There you go.
starts. It
Right on.
had the
Robin
Little
Hood,
Hood,
riding through the glen.
right?
Robin
It's
Hood. Yeah.
and then and they do their own version, Robin Hood, Little John walking through the forest, and sung by a contemporary artist doing, it's more of like a country kind of folk sound to it, but it's
Yeah.
I mean that is actually a very perfect kind of connection that they're his group premieres in 1973 and his favorite show is Robin Hood and he liked
Right.
the story of being
Yeah.
a traveling storyteller and that's who narrates the Disney version of Robin Hood is the lute playing
There you go.
troubadour
That was him.
rooster.
He didn't
So
care about money, as long as he had a roof over his head and enough food on the table, all he cared about was music, making music. And I
yeah.
remember when we were together the first time, so, this is a typical woman, I think. I'm 23 and I'm like, what are we doing? Where are we going? What's the plan in our life? And he looked at me and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We're making music and having fun. That's all that mattered.
Yeah.
And
That would have
great music.
yeah, that's it's such a I mean, listening to it, it's it's almost like some kind of like alternate dimension, like this is music that ought to be if I turned on a classic rock station or any of
Yeah,
it should be there,
that's
right?
right. Yeah.
But it's so it's like
Well,
from a different parallel existence,
right.
of 1970s America is where it came from. And
Yeah,
and
and
I think
unfortunately
it
the band was it was short-lived, it
yeah.
only lasted a year.
And it says something also about the industry in the music industry in that era. I mean, as we talked about previously off air, off the podcast, is that it was very rapidly emerging as a true industry in the 1970s. It wasn't um that you were kind of like groups were looking for the great moment where they were almost like dubbed like a knight to extend that medieval metaphor of like you are the chosen ones,
Right.
we're going to put all of our money and attention to you
Yeah.
and you're going to be playing because I mean in the 60s you didn't really have the stadium rock show that
No,
became a 70s thing that
right.
was something that you could do
Late
in the
70s.
70s and
Yeah, late 70s.
um
Yeah.
it was like that was no group could just do that on their own. You needed to have money behind it. You needed to have
Right.
a big company supporting you and a big record label. You couldn't just throw together, playing Dodger Stadium or something like that. It
Exactly.
was the big time. So I love talking with you. I hope we continue this conversation in other versions.
Yeah.
Let's I'll say the next bit off air, but well, I'll just say it now and edit it out. I really hope that we get to do the panel in October. I think that
Yes.
it'd just be wonderful in the Springsteen Center. Another artist who was emerging at the same exact time, just on the
Yeah.
other side of the country. But
Right.
Deborah Masterson, where can people get your book in their hands?
Yeah, go to my website. My website's got everything, events, social media, where you can purchase the book, you can request a signed copy, and it's DeborahMasterson.com. So Deborah is spelled without an H, huh? So it's
Mm.
a kind of unusual spelling. It's Debora Masterson.com. So
And we thank you so much for joining. And so this is like I said, two subjects at the same time. So thank you for joining the EPS podcast, where everything, including Freedom Quest, the band, and Freedom Quest, a love story, are primary sources of their respective time periods. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.